Good morning once again, brethren. We are here, of course, on this first holy day of the day of Unleavened Bread. I would like to start out by going back to a very familiar scripture in Exodus chapter 12 that certainly deals with this festival and this day. But I want to show you something from it that I suspect many of you may never have noticed before. We think we know what we're here celebrating, but I want to show you that this day is also the anniversary of a couple of other very important things that are the key to understanding them begins here in Exodus 12, and we're going to see that they tie in very directly because they tie in very directly with this day and what we're celebrating. Now, when I get into this, and when I show you what I'm talking about, you may not at first see the connection with the main point that I want to make in the sermon today, but I think as we proceed along, you will, because I want to focus our attention today on the importance of our being part of an inside job. Now, you've heard of things happening and saying, well, that was an inside job. Well, I'm going to focus our attention today on the importance of our being part of an inside job. Now, you may wonder how I'm going to get there from here because where we want to start is here in Exodus chapter 12. This is, of course, the time of Israel beginning to come out of Egypt. Remember the event of the Passover, and early the next morning, of course, all of the firstborn were struck dead through the land of Egypt that evening. And at midnight when the death angel came through. And so the next morning, we're told in verse 33, the Egyptians were urgent upon the people that they might send them out of the land in haste. The people took their dough before it was leavened, and they borrowed of the Egyptians, as the King James says, they received of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold. The Eternal gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And we're told in verse 37, the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth. There were about 600,000 on foot that were men. That was besides the children. Great multitude went up with them, along with their flocks and their herds and their cattle. They baked unleavened cakes of dough. It wasn't leavened. You know, the customary method of leavening was to simply let the dough set out. They didn't go to the store and buy a box of, package of Frenchman's yeast to make their dough. They didn't, get up and put in a little baking powder and make biscuits in the morning for breakfast. Nor did they run to the store and pick up a loaf of bread or stop by McDonald's and get them an Egg McMuffin or whatever it was. They didn't do any of those things. They made their bread, and the normal way of leavening bread at that time was to simply let it set. Because if you make up a dough and you let it set long enough, it will leaven. And of course, customarily, they would often save back a little bit of the dough from the previous time. What we use the term sourdough bread, and that's basically what they made. Well, they didn't have time to do that, and so everything was bound up. They couldn't let the dough set. The bread of haste, the bread of urgency, was unleavened bread because you just made it up, mixed up the dough, patted it out, and cooked it. So anytime somebody was in a hurry, that was what you did. Now they baked unleavened cakes. They were thrust out of Egypt. They could not tarry. Verse 40. Now we celebrated the beginning of that, you see. That night to be much observed that is mentioned, verse 42. It's for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. The Passover represented their redemption, their being spared from death. Now they began coming out of Egypt. But let me call your attention, verse 40. Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was or completed. You'll notice, if you have a King James Version, you'll notice that the word was is in italics. Now, there's a reason for that. Words that are in italics in the King James are supplied by the translators. They're not in the original. If you're reading verse 40 in the Hebrew text, what you find is there's not a verb. The Hebrew text simply says, the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt 430 years. Completed 430 years. I want to show you what this 430 years has to do with. It came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the self-same day. So the day of the Exodus, the 15th day of the first month, was an anniversary of something. It was an anniversary of an event that occurred 430 years exactly previous. Came to the pass at the end of the 430 years, even the self-same day, it came to pass that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. Do you know what event occurred exactly 430 years to the day before the Exodus? Well, I'll show you. You have to put a couple of scriptures together. If all you had was Exodus 12, you would scratch your head and you could come up with 2 or 3 theories and would have no way of proving which one was correct. But we can prove because we have not only the account in Exodus 12, but we also have the account that is driven back in Galatians 3. The Apostle Paul, writing under inspiration of the Holy Spirit, talked about, as we'll pick it up, Galatians 3:16. He said, now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. And he said, not and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to your seed, which is Christ. This I say, the covenant that was confirmed before of God in Christ, the law that was 430 years after, cannot disannul to make the promise of none effect. Now there was a covenant, we're told here, that was confirmed to Abraham 430 years before the giving of the law. Now, if you go from Exodus 12, you come just a few chapters, and you're at Mount Sinai, and the Sinai covenant. The Sinai covenant, the giving of the law. Now, you can certainly show from the book of Genesis that the Ten Commandments and other things were in full force and effect, but the giving of the law, the Sinai covenant, was made in the year of the Exodus, just made 7 weeks after the Exodus. What occurred 430 years before the Exodus? Well, according to Galatians 3:16 and 17, it was the covenant that was confirmed with Abraham. There was a covenant confirmed with Abraham, and exactly 430 years to the day later, God brought Israel out of Egypt. Now let's go back to Genesis 17 at this point, and let me show you something about this covenant. Genesis 17:1. When Abram was 99 years old, the Eternal appeared unto Abram. And he said, I am the Almighty God, walk before me, and be you perfect. Be absolutely wholehearted and sincere. And I will make my covenant between me and you, and will multiply you exceedingly. Abram fell upon his face, and God talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. Neither shall your name any more be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made you. And I will make you exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come out of you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you and their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto you and to your seed after you. I will give unto you and to your seed after you the land wherein you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And God said unto Abraham, you shall keep my covenant, therefore, you and your seed after you and their generations. This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and your seed after you. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. This shall be a token of the covenant between me and you. He that is 8 days old shall be circumcised. Every child, every man-child in your generation. Now, God went on and talked to him about the birth of Isaac, and we're told in verse 21, and my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto you at this set time in the next year. And he left off talking with him, and God went up from Abraham. And Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all that were born in his house, and all that were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh in their foreskins, notice, in the self-same day, as God had said unto him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised. When did Abraham do this? He clearly did it on the 15th day of the first month. 430 years to the day, we're told, Israel came out of Egypt. That was 430 years after the covenant with Abraham. Abraham, when God made that covenant and God then went up from talking to Abraham, didn't say Abraham waited a few days or he thought about it or he waited until next week or he put it off as long as he thought he could get by with. No, in the self-same day. In the self-same day. So, one other thing, I said there were two things. Exactly 430 years to the day before the Exodus, Abraham entered into that covenant with God, and the token of the covenant of circumcision. Circumcision was done 430 years. The first circumcision was done 430 years to the day. Abraham and his household before the Exodus. But let me show you something else in verse 21. God says, my covenant will I establish with Isaac, and Sarah shall bear unto you at just that time in the next year. So exactly 1 year from the time that God made the covenant with Abraham, exactly 1 year from the time Abraham was circumcised, Isaac was born. Now that was exactly 1 year later, so you could say 429 years before the Exodus. But we see here two events that clearly occurred on the 15th day of the first month. The circumcision covenant, Abraham was circumcised, and a year later, Isaac, the promised seed, was born. Now let's go to the New Testament. Let's go to Romans 2. And I'm going to, let's go to something else. I asked at the beginning of the sermon, do we realize how important it is for us to be part of an inside job? Well, notice here in Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 2 and verse 28. For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly. Neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh. But he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God. It's not enough just to focus on the outward. It's not enough just to outwardly be a Jew. It's not enough just to outwardly bear the mark of circumcision. The Jews of the day of Christ, the Jews in the first century, prided themselves on being the seed of Abraham. They were circumcised the 8th day. And they prided themselves on that, and they viewed that as the basis of their special relationship with God. Paul spends time here in Romans chapter 2 and 3 and 4 dealing with that subject and emphasizing the point that Abraham's relationship with God didn't start with circumcision, and that was not the basis. That was a sign. And now he makes the point in Romans 2:28 and 29 that the circumcision that is most important is the inward circumcision of the heart. And so now perhaps we begin to see a little bit of why the anniversary of circumcision would be chosen by God as the date for the deliverance of his people, the date to begin this festival of unleavened bread. A festival that began 430 years after God instituted the circumcision covenant with Abraham. But as Paul brings out in Romans 2, the real important thing is that we are circumcised inwardly, the circumcision of the heart. It is, you see, most important that it be an inside job. Now that was something the Pharisees certainly did not understand. Let's go back to Mark chapter 7. Remember, Jesus, on at least one occasion, it's recorded in 3 different Gospels, warned his disciples to beware the leaven of the Pharisees. Now the Pharisees prided themselves on their religious observance. They prided themselves on their relationship with God, and yet clearly when Jesus Christ looked at the Pharisees, what he saw was something very different from what they saw about themselves. The Bible spends a lot of time in the Gospels talking about the Pharisees and about aspects of their practice. The Sadducees and the Herodians are mentioned, but very little by comparison. Christ didn't spend nearly as much time dealing with it, so clearly there are many lessons that Jesus Christ desired that his people learn regarding the practice or the approach of the Pharisees. In Mark chapter 7, verse 1, we find that there came to Jesus Pharisees, and certain of the scribes that came from Jerusalem. And when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defilement, that is to say, with unwashed hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they wash their hands often, eat not, holding the tradition of the elders. When they come from the markets, except they wash, they eat not, and many other things there be, that they have received to hold is the washing of cups, and pots, and brazen vessels, and of tables. The Pharisees and the scribes said, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders? They eat bread with unwashed hands. You know, it's an interesting thing as you look into this subject of what they were doing. The first thing that we note here in Mark 7, that the practice that the Pharisees had was not based on specific instruction from God's Word. It was not Moses said in the law. It was the tradition of the elders. It was a custom. It was a practice. And it went back, actually, in this context, it probably didn't go back more than about 2 centuries. But, 2 centuries is a long time. 2 centuries ago was the time of the Louisiana Purchase. Thomas Jefferson was president. So a lot of things have happened in 2 centuries, and if somebody's been doing something for 2 centuries, it may seem like they've been doing it forever. You see, it was about 2 centuries earlier that the Pharisees came into being as a distinct group. Perhaps a little earlier than that, maybe 2.5 centuries. The Pharisees came into existence as a group sort of as a reaction against the compromising attitude of the priests with the Hellenistic world, Gentile world. Hellenism had quite a hold on that area of the world, the Near East, as a result of Alexander the Great and his conquest. And it had an approach and a philosophy that sought to bring everybody together with one approach, one philosophy, one world. Many of the priests who were the more educated, the intellectuals, really bought into that and became just sort of an empty shell as far as any pretext of religion. Some of them actively collaborated with the Hellenists and were outwardly Hellenists, and others just simply went through motions in the temple but were compromising in many ways. The Pharisees, the separated ones, that's what the term means. It was a reaction not among the priests but among the lay people who were antagonized by the priests and who were upset by all the things they saw around. And they then began to try to make a distinction. They took many of the ceremonies that applied to the temple, and they sought to apply those same ceremonies in their own homes, and to make, as they said, the table as sacred as the altar. And so you can follow their reasoning through it. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But the point was, by the time of Christ, here for 2 or 3 centuries, they had been following these customs, and it had to do not with the matter that your hands are dirty, don't you think you want to wash them before you eat? It was a matter of ceremonial defilement. And you see, the more they focused on it, the more they had the approach that defilement comes from contact with the without. Contact with other people. You brush against somebody, and how do you know that that person, didn't pet his dog a little earlier? That's an unclean animal. You brushed against him. May have touched something dead. You brushed against him. You were in the market, jostling around, big crowd of people. Oh, you better wash your hands. And it wasn't just sort of washing your hands. They had this elaborate tradition. They washed it up to the elbows, and they, held them up and let them drip dry. And because, they got into debates among themselves as to what kind of water you could use. Some of them felt that you could only use water that had come from a flowing source, as opposed to water, from something that was standing. So there were various disputes among them, and there were subgroups that argued among themselves about the technicalities of how to wash. But they all agreed you ought to wash. They noticed Christ's disciples not going through this elaborate rigmarole. And they confronted Jesus. They said, your disciples are eating with unwashed hands. They're defiled. Jesus proceeded to tell them they didn't know anything about defilement. He said, Isaiah prophesied of you, verse 6. Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. They talked about God. They were very meticulous and very careful in many ways, but he said, their heart is far from me. When it gets to the inside, they miss the point. In vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandments of God, you'll hold the tradition of men. Their focus was on a human tradition, the washing of pots and cups and many other such things. Again, we're not talking about washing a dirty pot because it's dirty and you want to wash it before you cook in it again. Everybody normally does that. They're talking about their particular matters of defilement. He said, you reject the commandments of God that you may hold to your own tradition. And he gives an example. He said, Moses said, honor your father and mother. Whoever curses his father and mother, let him be put to death. So he quotes from the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20, verse 12. He also quotes from one of the statutes, Exodus 21, verse 17. He said, Moses made it very plain in the Torah, the importance of showing respect and honor to your parents. But you say, verse 11, if a man shall say to his father or mother, it is corbin. In other words, it is dedicated. That is a gift by which you might be profited by me, he should be free. Many of those at that time, of course, being greedy and not wanting to help their needy parents, not wanting to give to them, they said, I've declared this corbin, this is dedicated to the temple. That didn't mean they'd given it to the temple, that means they had promised it or pledged it. Normally, they would leave it to the temple in their will. That way, see, they got to use stuff as long as they lived, and they had a good excuse not to give it to anybody, not to help anybody else with it, not to help their parents. Now, the Pharisees were very meticulous when it came to dotting the I's and crossing the T's. They made good lawyers. And you see that some of your best hotshot lawyers to this day, a certain tradition, a certain way of thinking. Looking at having a very technical mind and coming up with all of these ideas and ways of maneuvering. But the courts of this world may be impressed by something like that. And you may have, an Alan Dershowitz or somebody that comes in and really puts on this great show and all these technical arguments, and he manages to get through, and the court is impressed. Let me tell you something. God is not impressed by that approach to the law. He's not impressed by somebody that comes up with some little technical point. But you hadn't thought about that. God says, yeah, I thought about the whole thing. I gave a guideline. I gave an approach. I gave a statement of what is right and what is wrong, what's pleasing to me and what's not pleasing. Christ told the Pharisees, he said, it's very clear when you go back to what the Scripture says, that God wants you to honor your parents. You come up with a technicality as to how people can get out of helping a needy parent and be, quote, righteous. When you think you have outsmarted God, really the only one you've outsmarted is yourself. When people come up with clever maneuvers, and Christ just gave this one illustration, but it illustrated an approach to life. And I think we have to look at it not from the standpoint of saying, well, I've never said this is Corbin. Well, no, that's not maybe a term that we use. But what we have to examine in our lives is, have we come up with little clever strategies to sort of get around and miss the point of what God is after? So, Christ told them in verse 13, you're making the Word of God of none effect through your tradition. He went on, he called everybody there, and he said, I want you to understand something, verse 15. There's nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him. Defilement, which is a religious term that has to do with separation from God. Something that causes you to be separated from God. If you go back to Israel in the wilderness, defilement, the punishment for defilement was you were excluded from the camp. You were sent outside the camp of Israel. You couldn't stay in the camp because the tabernacle was in the midst of the camp. And God, with a pillar of fire, with a cloud, dwelt in the tabernacle, or dwelt there at the tabernacle. He placed his presence there. And so when someone was defiled, they had to go outside the camp. They had to wait for a prescribed period of time. They had to wash. And there was the sprinkling of the water of purification that the priest would sprinkle, and the defilement was removed. Now, Christ said, look, there's nothing from without that is going to spiritually cut you off from God. Rather, it's the things, verse 15, which come out of him. It's not the outside that defiles you, it's the inside. It's what comes from within. Well, the disciples, when they got in the house, the disciples said, what were you talking about? What did all that mean? And Jesus said, are you also without understanding? You don't perceive that whatever thing from without enter into a man can't defile him. It enters not into his heart, but into his belly. It's not what defiles you, what separates you from God has to do with what's in the heart. You eat something, what happens? Well, it goes into your digestive system and it's eliminated. It goes out into the groin. In other words, it goes through your digestive system and it's eliminated. Purging out, purging all foods. You eat something you eat something bad, or you eat something contaminated, you eat something that isn't good. Well, that doesn't reside in you. It passes through and is purged out. That which comes out of the man, that defiles the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, theft, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile the man. Defilement originates within, not without. Defilement isn't what other people do to you. Defilement is what proceeds from the heart. It gets back to attitudes and motives. All of the things we do ultimately come from the heart, don't they? You know, theft didn't originate in your hand. It's not sort of your hand just sneaked over there and got something, and the rest of you didn't know it was dirty. Put that back. No. If you steal something, it didn't start with your hand, it started with your mind. You saw what somebody else had and you wanted it. The hand was merely an instrument. When you look at these things, all the various, you just enumerate the whole list of things, but see, it all starts from the inside. It starts in the heart. Clearly, there's something that must be done about the heart. Remember, we started out by looking that 430 years before God delivered Israel from Egypt to the very death, Abraham was circumcised. And yet Paul explains to us that the real circumcision God is after is circumcision of the heart. Jesus said the problems originate with the inside, not the outside. Now let's go to Matthew 23. Matthew 23, verse 25. There's a whole series of woes. Christ is talking to the Pharisees. And he tells them in verse 25, "Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites! For you make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within are full of extortion and excess." You blind Pharisees, cleanse first that which is within the cup and the platter, that the outside of them may be clean also. Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites! You are like whitened sepulchres. They appear beautiful outwardly, but inside they're full of rot and decay. They're full of dead men's bones, all sorts of uncleanness. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within you're full of hypocrisy and iniquity. Again, they focused on the outward. And Christ, they thought it was all an outside job. Polish the brass, cleanse the platter. Christ said it's not all about an outside job, it's about an inside job. You are polishing things up on the outside, but inside is full of rot and decay. He said, "What, you have a tomb, and it looks pretty from a distance. Well, it's whitewashed, and just some of these areas over there, these burial caves in the sides of the hills." They said, "Really, it's pretty from a distance. You see that bright, gleaming white. It looks clean, looks beautiful. But inside, there's a decaying corpse." But he said, "That's what you fellows are like. You look impressive on the outside. You give the appearance that you have really got it all together. Everybody else is sort of scrounging around trying to make do. You have got it together." Oh, that's impressive. You ever know, sometimes some people can maybe be a little intimidating. They come across that somehow they are perfect, they've got it all together, and you'll never be able to measure up to be as good as them. Well, the Pharisees sort of gave that impression. But they had it together. Oh, boy, they were lined up. And a lot of people were spiritually intimidated by the Pharisees. Christ was not spiritually intimidated by them. He told them, he said, "You have all of this outward show that is impressive. But if you cleanse the inside, the outside will take care of itself. You may clean the outside of the cup. Cleanse first that which is within the cup and the platter, and the outside may be clean also." You see, the way to start making progress is from the inside out. Sure, you can polish, if you have a cup, you can polish the cup on the outside and get it shiny and nice, and leave the inside dirty. But if you plunge the whole thing down in the dishwater, and you scrub out the inside good, in the process, the outside gets cleaned up too. Christ told the Pharisees that their approach to getting clean was baptism. Defilement starts from within, and so also the cleansing. It's an inside job if it's done properly. Now, how do you go about doing that? How do you go about doing an inside job, as it were, when it comes to cleansing? Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 1. The Apostle Paul writes, "And you has he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sins. We have been given life who were as good as dead." We were under a death sentence because of sin. Where in times past you walked according to the course of this world. We were part of this world. We fit in with it. According to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now works in the children of disobedience. We were part of Satan's work. That had to do with our priorities, our conduct. We had our conduct in times past in the lust of the flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind. We were by nature the children of wrath, even as others. But God, who is rich in mercy, for his great love wherewith he loved, even when we were dead in sin, he has quickened us together with Christ. By grace are you saved. We were as good as dead, and he has given us life, offered us life in Christ. He's raised us up together, made us to sit together in heavenly places in Christ Jesus, that in the ages to come he might show the exceeding riches of his grace and his kindness toward us through Jesus Christ. For by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God has before ordained that we should walk in. It's not that you somehow get yourself clean enough and sort of cleaned up enough to where you're good enough for God. And you're good enough, and so you sort of come to God, and now he'll help you a little bit because you're good enough. If that's the case, people don't usually put it in quite those words, but that's often the approach. And my question is, well, how good is good enough? If you're going to be good enough for God, how good do you have to get? And how long do you have to be that good? Well, you start thinking it through that way. Well, wait a minute. Good enough? How far short of perfection is good enough? Well, how much less than perfection, is God satisfied? And how long do you have to hold it? You can be perfect. Can you be perfect for 1 second? Yeah, probably, for 1 second you ought to be able to avoid getting into too much trouble and, maybe just be reading the Bible so you're not even having bad thoughts. What about a minute? Chances are you can make it to a minute, you just really get into focusing on the Bible, and you're sitting still so you can't be getting into much. What about 2 minutes? You start projecting it through and ask yourself, now wait a minute, how long is good enough? If I can be good, if I can be perfect for 10 minutes, and that's an hour, a day, a week, a month. Well, now wait a minute, that's sort of stretching it out, isn't it? The point is, by grace, by God's freely offered gift, are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it's the gift of God. It's not that you sort of work up. God provides the grace if you can provide the faith. Sort of work it up, and, I think I can. Okay. By grace are you saved through faith, and that's not of yourselves, it's the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast, because if somehow you did it, then you're going to be proud of it, aren't you? Sort of like Benjamin Franklin, he was a very meticulous individual, and he got on this kick of perfection. He thought that, he made a list of verses, is what he did. Made a list of verses, and he thought, okay, I'm going to take them one at a time. I'm going to concentrate on one at a time, and when I get that one down, and I'm doing that one, I'll move on to the next, and when I get through with the whole list, I'll be perfect. Well, it didn't take Benjamin Franklin all that long to figure out that while that theory maybe sounded good, it didn't work. In fact, humility was one of the virtues that he listed, and he made the observation after a while. He said, I'm afraid that if I ever became truly humble, I'd be proud. Then I'd blow the whole thing, right? See, not of works, lest any man should boast. If it's a matter of you making yourself good enough, then the next thing, you will have blown the whole deal, because now you're going to be proud. Look what I've done. Certainly more impressive than what you've done, huh? So that's blowing the whole thing. No, we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works. It's not a matter that we're not supposed to do good work. Yes, of course we are. We're His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God has before ordained that we should walk in. God is making something out of us. He's making something out of us. You know what the only difference is between just a pile of dirt, a lump of clay, and a beautiful porcelain vase on display in a expensive shop in downtown Dallas that would cost a fortune? The only difference between the lump of clay and the porcelain vase is the touch of the master's hand. Because that's what the porcelain vase started out. It's just dirt. You look at yourself and say, and if you have ever truly looked at yourself, you have at one point or another had to come to the conclusion, I'm dirt. You never thought that. Then go back and take another look. I dare say that all of us at one point or another have looked in the mirror and have felt like that and have seen that in our lives and thought, somehow I'm so unworthy I'll never measure up. The difference between the pile of dirt, the lump of clay, and the porcelain vase that cost $1,000 is the touch of the master's hand. It's incredible what the master potter can do. You go sometimes to a store, it's just interesting. I suspect it's out of the price range that any of us you go to one of these really fancy places that has all these beautiful things on display, and if you've got kids, you just about want to handcuff their hands because if they touch one of it or brush against it, I'll never be able to pay for it. But you look at some of those beautiful items, and you admire them, and they're beautiful, and that's great. But you see, the reason it's beautiful is because someone who knew what he was doing, a master potter, took that and made something out of it. I dare say, for you or for me, if we were to have a lump of clay and given it, I remember years ago as a kid, we had some summer project or vacation Bible school or whatever it was that we were doing. We were given a lump of clay, and when we got through with it, it still looked sort of like a lump of clay. It was supposed to be, we were supposed to make something for our parents. And it turned out to be something only a parent could love, because it was a, sort of ugly, misshapen mess, and we were proud of it, and they acted like they were. If you and I, if it's all about what we can make out of ourselves, then what you wind up with is what the little 7-year-old comes bringing home to mama. Look what I made for you. And, you've all seen it. In fact, many of you probably made one. It's a vast difference from that beautiful vase on display. See, it's all about the touch of the master's hand, the master potter. We're His workmanship. Now let's go on a little further. Go to Colossians 1. Colossians 1 verse 20. Having made peace through the blood of His cross, by Him to reconcile all things unto Himself. By Him, I say, whether there are things in the earth or things in heaven, and you that were sometimes alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, yet now has He reconciled in the body of His flesh through death, to present you holy and unblameable and unreprovable in His sight, yes, you continue in the faith, grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you've heard, which is preached unto every creature which is under heaven, whereof I, Paul, am made a minister. We were alienated from God. Yes, we were defiled. We were alienated from God, separated from God, but it was because of what was in our mind, our thoughts, our attitudes. That is the origin of our actions. Christ died to present us holy and unblameable and unreprovable if you continue in the faith. How do you continue in the faith? Well, it's tied in with not being moved away from the hope of the gospel. Let's come down here to Colossians 3 verse 1. If you then be risen with Christ. See, we read earlier in Ephesians and Colossians 1 about being set in heavenly places, set in the heights. If you're then risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sits on the right hand of God. If you're not moved away from the hope of the gospel is the resurrection. The hope of the gospel is that you and I can be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, that we can be raised from the dead. The hope of the gospel is that we can inherit the kingdom prepared for us from the foundation of the world. Well, if we have that hope, if that's really what's important to us, then he says, set your affection on things above, not on things in the earth. For you're dead, your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall you also appear with Him in glory. That's the hope of the gospel. And if that's really our hope, then he says, set your affection on things above. The key has to do with where our affections are. Our affections are going to be set where our hopes and our dreams are. Where people have their hearts. You know, we have our hopes and our dreams in life. And those are the things that we think about, that we anticipate. That's where we set our affection. Now, if we set our affection on the things above, then we will mortify, we will put to death, either by starvation or strangulation. See, that's, if you're going to mortify something, you're going to put it to death, then you don't feed it, you don't nurse it. Members that are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil desire, covetousness, which is idolatry. For which things sake the wrath of God comes on the children of disobedience, in which you also walked sometimes when you lived in them. But now you put off all these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication. Notice the connection between first setting our affection on things above. If the hope of the gospel is what remains in us, then we are going to, if the hope of the gospel is what remains in us, then that's going to determine where our affections are set. And if that's where our affections are, then we're going to want to either starve or strangle these wrong attitudes and desires, the immorality and the uncleanness and the evil desires and the covetousness. By starving it, I mean you simply don't feed it. You don't do the things that sort of maintain those attitudes. Notice back over in Colossians 1 again. We saw in verse 23, we're to continue in the faith grounded and settled, not being moved away from the hope of the gospel. Notice Paul goes on to explain in verse 26, talking about the mystery which has been hidden from ages and from generations, but is now made manifest to his saints, to whom God would make known what is the riches of the glory of this mystery among the Gentiles, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Our hope of glory is Christ living in us. That is the hope of the gospel, the hope of glory, Christ in us. We anticipate the time when Christ will appear, as he mentions in Colossians 3:4, and we will appear with him in glory. Christ living in us is our hope of glory. If that's really where our hopes and our dreams abide, then we will set our affection. And you know something? Your heart, your mind, your body will follow where your affections are set. Where your heart is, the rest of you will go. If your affections are set on things above, a lot of other things will take care of themselves. Let's notice something. Let's notice another encounter with a Pharisee. Luke chapter 7. Verse 36. One of the Pharisees desired Jesus that he would eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house, and he sat down to food. And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner. Oh, she was a sinner. Was she the only one in the city, you reckon? Only person there was a sinner? Well, no, but she was really bad. She had the reputation of being a sinner. The Pharisee that invited Jesus to eat with him didn't consider himself as a sinner. In fact, he really knew that he was far spiritually superior to this woman. Notice, a woman in the city that was a sinner, when she knew Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment. She stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and she kissed his feet and anointed them with the ointment. Now, don't you think that all of a sudden, quite a bit of stir was going on at the table? Can you imagine? She comes in and maybe nobody much pays her attention at first, and she's just standing sort of behind where Jesus is and crying. And the next thing they know, she's making quite a scene. The way they looked at it, boy, she's down there at his feet, and she's crying, and she's wiping his feet, and she's kissing his feet, and she's pouring out this expensive ointment on his feet. And the Pharisee, which had bidden him, saw it. And he spoke within himself. Well, that settles that. If this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what manner of woman this is that touches him, for she is a sinner. If this man were a prophet of God, he certainly would have thrown her away and gotten rid of her and said, get away from me, don't touch me. I'll be defiled. I'll have to go wash myself again. Oh, he was a prophet. He'd recognize what that woman was. She's a sinner. Jesus, of course, knew what the Pharisee was thinking. The Pharisee didn't say this out loud at the table. He just thinking, he said, well, we got him pegged. He's obviously not from God. He's obviously not a prophet. Because he wouldn't allow, a prophet wouldn't allow a woman, a sinner, to get that close. Jesus said, Simon, we got a question for you. Oh, well, teacher, say on. He said there was a certain creditor and he had two debts. One owed him 500 pence and the other owed him 50 pence. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Which one of them do you think loved him the most? Simon thought about it and said, well, I suppose that he to whom he forgave most. And Jesus said, that's right, you rightly judged. And he turned to the woman. And he said unto Simon, do you see this woman? Well, Simon had been seeing the woman for quite a while. He was wondering why Jesus hadn't seen her. He said, do you see this woman? I entered into your house. You didn't give me any water for my feet. That was customary, a customary sign of hospitality. That you at least provide water for somebody to wash their feet. In fact, the better thing was that you had somebody to actually wash the feet for them. He said, I came into your house. You didn't give me any water for my feet. She washed my feet with tears and wiped them with the hairs of her head. You didn't give me any kiss. You didn't greet me in the customary way. This woman, since the time I came in, has not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil, you didn't anoint. You didn't. But this woman has anointed my feet with oil. Therefore I say unto you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loves much. To whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. Simon, I guess you don't feel like you owe very much because you don't have much in the way of sin, do you? So maybe that's why you don't have much love. Huh? He told the woman, your sins are forgiven. They that sat at meat began to say within themselves, who is this that forgives sins also? Boy, I just stirred them up all the more. And he told the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. The woman was deeply aware. She didn't need the Pharisee to tell her that she's a sinner. A sinner in my house? Oh no. She didn't need somebody to tell her she was a sinner. She knew she was a sinner. And she hated what she was. And at some point along the way, we're not given all the details, but she had stood in the crowd, perhaps on several occasions, and heard Jesus teach. Perhaps she had seen some of the miracles. She had heard things about him. She had heard his message. And she believed that he was from God. He had a message from God, and it offered her deliverance from what she thought she was so entangled in. The indication, of course, is that the woman, she had the notorious reputation of a sinner. What was she? Well, she was probably a prostitute. People sometimes get entangled in a lifestyle and they think it's hopeless. They think there's no way I can get out of this. There's no way I can change. She didn't have hope until she heard Jesus' message. And Jesus' message lifted her eyes from the around, and all she could see was the mess she was in, and she knew it wasn't a good spot that she was in, but she didn't know how to get out of it, and she didn't think there was any hope, and there she was. She heard Jesus' message, and her eyes got lifted from the around to see the above. And she came to him, deeply moved by a recognition on the one hand of what she was, and a recognition on the other of who he was. And she understood who he was far more than the religious leaders. The Pharisee who had condescendingly invited him to his house, going to sort of check this guy out. This woman had heard his message, and that was all the checking she needed. She knew. And as Jesus said, she loved much. He was deeply aware of her inadequacy, but she loved much. He was so deeply grateful for the opportunity that God's plan gave her. See, God wasn't disgusted with her and ready to throw her away the way the religious leaders were. Well, anybody's done what you've done, I don't guess there's, certainly not room for them. She heard Jesus' message and she realized there was hope and there was hope. Her life didn't have to stay the way it was. And she was so deeply grateful for the opportunity that was given. You see, quite a contrast from those who were totally concerned about outward appearance. A contrast between this poor woman and the Pharisee. Jesus drew those examples over and over. And he Those accounts are contained in Scriptures that we might learn. Notice in Ephesians 3, verse 14. For this cause I bow my knees unto the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, of whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named, that He would grant you according to the riches of His glory to be strengthened with might by His Spirit in the inner man. See, it's in the inside, John. Strengthened with might by His Spirit in the inner man, that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith. Circumcision, the real thing, is of the heart. That you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all things what is the breadth and length and depth and height, and to know the love of Christ which passes knowledge, that you might be filled with all the fullness of God. You might be filled with the fullness of God. Unto Him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us, unto Him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus throughout all ages, worlds without end. Notice back in Galatians chapter 5. Galatians chapter 5 and verse 16. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. That's the key to changing. Walk in the Spirit. If you're walking in the Spirit, you're not fulfilling the lust of the flesh, because the flesh and the Spirit lead us different ways. The flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. They're contrary one to the other. You can't do the things that you would. If you're led of the Spirit, you're not under the law. You're no longer under the law's penalty. The works of the flesh are manifest. Adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lawlessness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulation, wrath, strife, sedition, heresy, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like. All sorts of things. Those are the works of the flesh. Which I tell you before, as I told you in times past, they which do such things cannot inherit the kingdom of God. What's the solution then? But the fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace and long-suffering and gentleness and goodness and faith and meekness and temperance. Against such there is no law. They that are Christ have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let's not be desirous of vain glory, doing some political objective, provoking one another, envying one another. No, there's a lot of different ways to be wrong. We're to live in the Spirit, and if we live in the Spirit, we're to walk in the Spirit. Now let's go back to Romans 8. How do you live in the Spirit? Romans 8:1. There's therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. The law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has made me free from the law of sin and death. What the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh. It takes more than God's law. Because the problem with the law is not the law. The problem with the law is us. The law is weak through the flesh. If all you've got is your ability to do what God says, then you fall short. What the law could not do in that it was weak through the flesh. God sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh and for sin, condemned sin in the flesh. Jesus Christ overcame sin in the flesh. He condemned sin in the flesh. That the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. They that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh. They that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. To be carnally minded is death. To be spiritually minded is life and peace. You see, it's a matter of where we set our affections, where your heart is where the rest of you will go. Where is our heart? Carnal mind is enmity against God, not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. So they that are in the flesh cannot please God. But you're not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if so be that the Spirit of God dwell in you. And if any man have not the Spirit of Christ, he's none of his. And if Christ be in you, the body is dead because of sin, and the Spirit is life because of life. If the Spirit of Him that raised up Jesus from the dead dwell in you, He that raised up Christ from the dead shall also quicken your mortal body by that Spirit that dwells in you. Therefore, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live after the flesh, because if you live after the flesh, you're going to die. But if through the Spirit you mortify the deeds of the body, you'll live. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they're the sons of God. You've not received the spirit of bondage again to fear. You've received the spirit of sonship. We have an intimate connection with God. The Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit. We're the children of God. We are saved, verse 24, by hope. The Spirit, verse 26, helps with our infirmities, our weaknesses, our sufferings. Sometimes we don't even know what we ought to pray for. And the Spirit connects us with God. Expresses the inexpressible. We need to understand, the Pharisees of Jesus' day, by and large, did not understand that. They heard Jesus' message, the same as this woman did, and the same as others. They never really got the point, even at the end. Even at the end, they were still expecting outside job. Let me show you something here and wrap up here in Matthew 27. This is right after they had thought they had succeeded. Jesus was crucified, buried, he was dead. Matthew 27 and verse 57. When evening was come, right just prior to sunset, Joseph of Arimathea went to Pilate, begged the body of Jesus. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, laid it in his own new tomb, which had been hewn out of a rock, rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre, and departed. Verse 62, the next day, which is this day, Christ was buried at the end of the Passover day, so on the next day, first holy day of Unleavened Bread, the anniversary of the Exodus, the anniversary of Abraham's circumcision, the next day that followed the day of the preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came together to Pilate, and they said, "Sir, we remember this deceiver. He said, when he was alive, after 3 days I'll rise again. Command that the sepulchre be made sure until the third day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away and say to the people, he's risen from the dead." So the last error would be worse than the first. Pilate said, "You have your watch, go make it as sure as you can." They went and made the sepulchre sure, sealing the stone and setting a watch. You see, they were so worried somebody was going to break in the tomb from the outside and steal the body. What they never had grasped. It wasn't going to be an outside job. It was an inside job. The problem wasn't somebody getting in the tomb and sneaking the body away. They could seal the tomb from the outside all they wanted, because the miracle took place on the inside. The Pharisees never understood the lesson that Christ taught. What about us as we enter this week of the days of Unleavened Bread, these 7 days? Are we merely focused on the outside, or are you truly part of the inside?